right there. That little bit of white corrosion, that little bit of junk, is what may have probably killed this MacBook. This is PP Bus G3 Hot, so this is 12 volts. This right here is 2.5 volts, half a millimeter, a quarter millimeter from the output. So any little bit of dust, anything, gets in between these two, it's going to send some portion of 12 volts to the 2.5 volts, which kills the SSD, which effectively kills the machine. This problem frustrates me to no end, because this is avoidable, and when this goes bad like this, it takes all your data with it. There's no way to get your data back, because these SSD chips are burnt out when this happens. Hi everybody. So I've made videos on this before. I know I've mentioned it in passing on my channel and Louis Rossman's channel a couple times, more than a couple times, because this beats me up. So what I have here is an A2141 16-inch MacBook Pro board, and it came to the shop stuck on 5 volts, no power, doesn't turn on, doesn't do anything, stuck on 5 volts. So, are any of you technicians out there, if you know, you know. As soon as you get an A2141 that's stuck on 5 volts, you go and test two things. Well, one thing, two different spots for it, and that's the power supply for the SSD. So anybody that doesn't know this, the new MacBooks all have integrated SSDs. They're integrated into the board. It's just these silver chips, if you can see it from there. These silver chips here, they're on both corners, both sides, depending on configuration, how much memory you have. That's the SSD. It's built into the board. You can't change it, you can't swap it out or anything. It is possible to change the chips, but it's so exceedingly difficult to get everything right that it's just not worth it for most people. So stuck on 5 volts, you immediately go after the power supply for the SSD. It's split into two sides, so you have a power supply for this side, a power supply for that side to supply the SSD with power. And the main chip, the main Texas Instrument chip that they used, it doesn't go bad per se, but just its design is not conducive to a consumer device that has air flowing through it with dust. We'll get into it. We'll get into it. This problem frustrates me to no end, because this is avoidable, and when this goes bad like this, it takes all your data with it. There's no way to get your data back, because these SSD chips are burnt out when this happens. So first thing you do, as soon as you get the A2141 on your desk, you don't even need to take it out of the case at this point. So take a look at it. We take our multimeter in ohms mode, and we check the power supply for the left and right. The right side is a little bit easier. Let's get a close-up view here. So this is the power supply structure for the right side. This is an unpopulated SSD chip. This is the SSD chip that's on this side. There's one on the other side as well, and there's 4 on the other side of the board. So we take our multimeter. So this is the main chip that produces the 2.5 volts to power the SSD. It produces it through these two coils here, and gets smoothed out for some capacitors that are around and such. But so from the 12 volt PP bus rail gets turned into 2.5 volts for the SSD chips. So what we're going to test, if you look really closely, you can actually see that I've already stuck a multimeter probe into the solder of that one. So my black probe on ground, and right into here, we get 3,000 ohms and climbing, 21,000 ohms. This is good. This is what you want to see, 21,000 ohms. It starts off low, and then as capacitors charge, then you see that I got 21,000 ohms. So this is good on this side. These are both together once they get to the other side, so you should get the same readings on both sides. But now let's go over to the other side. Now the other side, if it's still in the case, if it's still in the MacBook itself, this is the other side SSD chips. And we have access to the power rail right here on these capacitors. These are some smoothing capacitors. So we don't need to flip it over to get to the same coils that we saw on the right side of the board. So we can check just right here. Oh, that's ground. This is no, that is ground. Nope, they're both shorted to ground. Let me see on the schematic which one is which. So if we go over to the schematic, we're looking at this area here. So this is ground, and this is our PP2V5 NAND. So this is the 2.5 volts to the NAND. And if we go back to the microscope, when I put my probe on that, I'm getting a dead short. 0.2 ohms, 0.1 ohms. So this is completely shorted to ground. Now, a dead short might not be a total loss, because then that could be the chip is just shorted to the ground in itself or something like that. So this may be recoverable. But we'll flip the board over and we'll see that we have pretty much the same structure as the first side that we looked at. It's the power chip and 2 coils and some smoothing capacitors and control capacitors and such. But this one, it's hairy, it's dirty, it's yucky. You see some MacBook hair around it. There's a discoloration. It shows up on camera even. There's a discoloration in this corner. But what's really concerning is this little bit of shininess that's spitting out from underneath the chip right there. So if we get this up on an angle, right there, that little bit of white corrosion, that little bit of junk is what may have probably killed this MacBook. So it's killed the SSD, which is basically the MacBook. Now let's look at this a little bit zoomed out. Take a look at the power structure, what we're looking at here, the way everything looks, and let's look at the schematic. So now we'll go over to the schematic for this. Here's exactly what we were looking at there. So we have the 2 big coils on either side, a couple capacitors, resistors for control, and this is the corner right here that we were looking at, the little grossness and the little white thing here. So right here, this is PP bus G3 hot. So this is 12 volts, PP bus G3 hot. This right here is 2.5 volts. That's the regulated down voltage. So the input is 1/2 millimeter, 1/4 millimeter from the output. So any little bit of dust, anything, any little bit of dust, dander, mite, a cockroach poop, anything gets in between these two, it's going to send some portion of 12 volts to the 2.5 volts, which kills the SSD, which effectively kills the machine. So it shorted to ground. It being 0 ohms to ground was possibly recoverable, but as soon as you look under here and we see that there's junk under that corner, kind of hard to see. It looks better in my eyepieces than it does on the camera, but that's what we're looking at, is that little bit of white stuff right there. So let's take this off the board. Let's look at it. Let's measure things with it out. Some fume extraction. Thing's going to get a little loud. A little bit of flux, getting caught in all the MacBook hair. You want to be careful in this area because if there is any chance of saving the data, you don't want to overheat the SSD chip right here. So air, air blowing away from the SSD chip towards the corner of the whole board here. And we'll just heat up this chip. Get it off the board. And right away, you can see that those two balls look like they're connected by junk. There's stuff between there. So now if you look, this is what we saw on the schematic. So these 6 pins are 12 volts. And then these 3 and then these 3 are the 2 halves of the buck regulator to make the 2.5 volts. That's how close that your MacBook is from death all the time. It's 12 volts here, 2.5 volts there. That gap right there is how close your MacBook is from death. So let's see if we can measure that. I have a ruler here. I have a little ruler. This is 1/16 of an inch. It's kind of hard to get close to the board there. See if I get the end of it close to the board. That's 1/16 of an inch to the outer edges of the ball. It's the same size as the lines on the ruler. So these little tiny lines on the ruler are the same size as the gap between there. Let's see, I have a feeler gauge. Let's see, this is pieces of metal that are very specific widths. They're very tall though, so that's kind of hard to see. Yeah, that fits right in between there. 6/1000ths of an inch. 0.006 thousandths of an inch. Let's see, I have all this stuff is coming out of my caliper case. So let's see what the calipers say. Can I get it? Yeah, that looks about right to me. It's kind of hard to see, kind of hard to tell. 0.18 millimeter. What is that in inches? 0.007. Yeah. So that's it. 0.18. It looks right. You can see where it's not showing any balls. It gets between the balls. So 0.18 millimeter of space. That's how, at all times when this thing is on, that's how close your MacBook is to death. Well, any little bit of anything gets in between there. But let's test it now. Now that we have the chip off, let's see if it was the chip that was shorted or if it's the NANDs that were shorted. So, ground on ground, red on here, 1.4 ohms. 1.1 ohms. So without this in here, this can't be the short. It has to be over here. So let's look at the schematic. So it has to be this, because I'm testing this. So the coil is basically just a piece of wire when you're looking at stuff. So it's just a coiled up piece of wire. So we just go here, and that goes to all the NANDs. It also goes to a couple of the chips, the ocarina. That's all has to do with the SSD. So let's be certain. Let's take this a little bit farther. Let's be certain. I'm going to inject voltage. I'll inject, it's supposed to be 2.5 volts. I'll inject maybe 1 volt. We'll see how it goes from there. So I'm going to solder some wires to the board, ground on ground. And positive on one of these coils. Now we'll set our power supply for 1 volt. Recall 3, enter. Okay, that is 1 volt. Now I'm going to check for some kind of heat signature on these to see what chip is bad, if there are any chips bad. So there's something weird about these chips. This weird glossy finish. It does not have a good heat emissivity signature, so you can't see it on the thermal cam. So to get by that, you take some Kapton tape and you just put little pieces of Kapton tape over every one of the chips, and the Kapton tape will modify the emissivity. It's a hard word to say. The emissivity of the chips, and then we'll be able to see if one's shorted and what corner is getting warm. So I'm just going to cover all 4 chips on this side with some Kapton tape. This is some of the stuff you have to be aware of when you start using a thermal cam. That some things don't have the proper emissivity and you won't see that it's getting hot. Okay, let me get my thermal cam. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. So here I have the Seek Pro thermal cam. I'll connect that up to my phone. And I will start recording a video on it. Okay, so here's what it looks like under the thermal cam. The hot spot here is because I just soldered with hot air. So that's the mat, my soldering mat underneath. As you can see, the board itself is all relatively the same. Now let's turn on the 1 volt and see if that's enough to light up anything. Yep, right there. Immediately, as soon as you heard the snap, there it is. That's 1 NAND that's dead, and that's it. That's just 1 NAND has died on here. So this board is savable. You can change this 1 NAND from a board with the same configuration, donor board, and put the 1 NAND on there, but the data is not savable. There's nothing you can do for the data. Once you lose that part, there's nothing you can do to get the data off of this. So never trust your data on any of these machines. So the good news about this is that it's not, this is not guaranteed to happen to every MacBook. The problem is that this chip is right in the path of air for ventilation. So let me get these wires off of here and I'll show you. If we take the case back, we put this in the case here. I'm not going to put it all the way in, but these vents here, let's show you a little closer. You look at the side here, these vents, you see where all the air is coming in, all the dust is piling up. This is where the air gets pulled into the machine to then get sucked out from the fans, and the fans blow it out the back through the heat sinks, and it comes up by the screen or underneath it if it's closed. But right here, this is the underside of the board is the chip that we're looking at right here. So you see all this dust that's built up on the speaker here. All that dust is building up on the edges of the board and all the chips on the edge of the board here. So you get a little bit of dust underneath this chip. A little bit of dust attracts some moisture. You know, the dust is fine on its own. It's just dust. But when you get into a moist environment, it's a humid day out, or you put this in the bathroom playing a YouTube video while you're showering or something like that, that moisture gets pulled in and it gets absorbed by the dust. the dust gets saturated by moisture, and then that little piece of dust becomes conductive. It gathers around that 12-volt point, and either the dust itself will short out and send more than 2.5 volts to the NAND, which kills the NAND, or it will start a corrosion around that 12-volt point. 12 volts and water corrode pretty quickly. It's going to grow and bloom and start doing all kinds of weird things to the solder. And then when that ball gets big enough, you saw how small the gap is that it needs to fill. Once that ball grows out and gets big enough, it sends 12 volts to the 2.5 volt line and kills the NAND. This is avoidable. So I'm wondering, I'd like to see a data sheet from Texas Instruments. If we look at the one that's still good on this side, this is the same thing. This one doesn't go as bad often. I think the bottom of the board gets more air than the top of the board, or vice versa, whichever way you're looking at. Whenever I talk about top and bottom, I usually talk about when we open the machine. So the top of the board for me is the side that the CPU and GPU is on. The bottom of the board is, when you're working at the machine, would be the top of the board. It can get confusing sometimes. But see, this one is not as dirty. It did not get damaged or anything. So what I do, whenever I have one of these that came in and got fixed at Lewis's shop, whenever I had one of these that came in and got fixed for any other reason, these chips got cleaned thoroughly, dried, so I heated them with the hot air, made sure that everything was completely dry, completely clean, some rubbing alcohol, a toothbrush, clean it all off, and then I would encase the entire thing in hot glue. You can use the mechanics, what is this, the UV conformal coating. You can use brush-on conformal coating. I found that the hot glue from a regular hot glue gun works pretty well. You just squeeze some of that on there. You can use your hot air to move it around and make sure that it settles down completely on the board. And that has worked. I'm sure I've saved a couple of our customers from later on losing their data and their machine exploding by just having that little bit of hot glue covering that point there. So if you have an A2141, this is also a problem for the A1990. Both of those machines, the A2141 16-inch, the A1990 15-inch, are susceptible to this problem. This is at least 75% of the machines that come in for repair are unrepairable because of this. Because one of the NANDs are dead, or all of the NANDs are dead. I'm surprised only one got fried on this. But yeah, stay away from the 2141. If you have a 2141, get it serviced with some conformal coating on those points. I offer the service at my shop. It's kind of expensive because this is a lot of work taking this whole thing apart and making sure everything's clean and all that. Go with somebody experienced that knows what they're doing, knows what they're talking about with this machine. And it could last you a good long time. Other than that, this machine is good. They put good hardware into this machine. It's that one little tiny chip is this thing's Achilles heel. Tiniest little thing, and poof, done. Anyway, I hope you learned something. If you have a 2141, you want to keep it alive, get in contact with me. Links and everything all over the place. I just want to save these things. I like this machine, except for that. It frustrates me to no end. It probably shows. It frustrates me to no end that they did this. Texas Instruments probably says you're supposed to conformal coat it, or it's probably supposed to underfill it, but they don't. Hope you learned something. Talk to you guys later. Another quick part while I was putting this together, I forgot to mention that these little flaws, they were very prevalent in all of the Intel MacBooks. This problem with the SSD dying, the other issues where a little bit of water on the display connector will kill the either the mux if it's the one with a GPU, CPU, or just kill the CPU if it's the machine that doesn't have a discrete GPU. All of this seems to have been fixed with their M lines. So once they started using their own processors, they took care into not letting any of these flaws happen. There's very few that I can think of for the M1, M2 that have an inherent point that will fail and will kill other things. They're less repairable in the whole getting parts and everything like that, but they're more repairable in that the things don't self-destruct. The M1, M2, probably the M3 as well, I haven't dealt with one of them yet though, they don't self-destruct like these do. So these machines just commit suicide all the time. They a little bit of dust in the wrong spot and I'm done with the world. The M1, M2, they're a lot hardier, and it's by design, it seems, that they made them where they're not going to die. You're going to have a better user experience, better repairability with the new ones. And I hate to think that they didn't care about it because it was Intel processors. It seems like they had a problem with Intel and stuff like that. They had to rely on them, and I don't know. It doesn't give me a happy, warm feeling knowing that they left these glaring faults in the Intel ones, and then they followed up and fixed all of them in the M1, their own processor. Once they put their own silicon in, now they're much more careful about where they place things. I don't know. I just thoughts while I was reassembling this. Just thoughts I wanted to put down in the video. This is going to go to a sad person.